Well, good morning. Here we are. We are the bright morning of beautiful 25% tariffs on our country. And, well, let's just say people are freaking out, rightfully so. It is unprecedented times. Things are a little strange. Things are uncertain. And we are kind of feeling a little uneasy about what our futures are consisted of. And so we want to look to our leaders, or those who represent us, as people who could really bring some kindness, some thoughtfulness, remove the ambiguity of what's going on, and try to work with what is currently they're working with, and try to come to a solution and look at what the real issue is happening within our country. But instead, we get guys like Doug Ford saying this.
If they want to try to annihilate Ontario, I will do everything, including cut off their energy, with a smile on my face. So, and I'm encouraging every other province to do the same. Quebec, Manitoba, BC, we all have to act in unison. Out east, they rely on our energy. They need to feel the pain. They want to come at us hard, we're going to come back twice as hard.
If they want to come at us hard, then we got to go at them twice as hard. And so with this rhetoric, with what the big stick that the U.S. has, what do you think we're going to do? And then like what happened last week with Zelensky in the United States, the question remains, how much longer do you think Trump in the U.S. is going to take this type of threatening? How long is it going to be until they do something drastic like, I don't know, pull out of NATO? What are your thoughts there, Reg?
So first off, what's funny about that one is that he doesn't mention Alberta, the biggest energy producer in Canada. Yeah. He's like, like BC and Quebec and the Atlantic provinces and Manitoba and Saskatchewan. Alberta. Just very quiet about that one, but we know how that goes because they're only getting 10% on their oil. So, and that was because of the work of Daniel Smith. They probably could have gotten it lower if our, Melanie Jolie and friends weren't too busy shooting their faces off. Like, I'm not happy about the 25% tariffs. Trump is not my best friend. But the thing is that if we keep playing this game and we keep vilifying them instead of trying to work with them, they are going to pull out of everything, and they are going to say, you know what, you're not worth our time. We're just going to trade war you to death. We don't care if we crush your economy. Too bad, so sad. We need some critical minerals. If we can't get it out of Ukraine, we'll get it out of you, Canada, one way or the other. And I have a sneaking suspicion that that's probably on their minds as well. So, like I said, don't love them, but at the same time, I do think that we are shooting ourselves in the foot by making an enemy out of them.
And this is one thing I know those on the left, those who are not fully paying attention, are going to get really, really upset that I'm about to say. And that is the fact that we, as Canadians, we are actually taking center stage in a geopolitical influence war. And we are the only ones who don't realize it's going on. Russia's putting a presence through our Arctic. China's putting a presence through our Arctic. China's putting Chinese police stations within our country that our politicians have done nothing about. We have cartels operating with United Front happening on the West Coast and throughout our country. We have huge money laundering hubs run by Chinese syndicates out of Vancouver and Toronto. And we are the only ones who don't realize what's going on. And we want to stick to the rhetoric that, we only 1% of fentanyl goes to the States from Canada. Yet we only check 1% of the shipping containers that come through our ports. So yeah, it adds up, I guess, in some degree. And this is why, is it a bull in a china shop kind of idea? Yes, it is. But this is Trump doing his work to try get the attention of Canadians that this is not going well for you guys. You need to realize what is happening at your borders right now. But instead, our politicians and our media have made the enemy Trump, have made the enemy the United States. And our focus is in the wrong place right now. And that it needs to be focused on our politicians. It needs to be focused on how we're spending money on the border. Instead of putting $5 billion in Ukraine, we need to put $5 billion in the Arctic. Put $5 billion at our borders. But that's not what we're doing. We managed to scrounge up $1.3 billion and still have done nothing with the pledge of money that we've put forward. And that is the issue that we're currently seeing. And that's why I think is a good moment. If we're having these issues with Russia, we're having these issues with China, and this rhetoric comes from the United States, we are in the middle of something much larger than we realize. And so making an enemy out of the States may not be for the best.
And what's happening too is, like, especially after that Zelensky exchange in the Oval Office, like we're seeing the world right now kind of turn their back on America. And they're like, oh, Zelensky, such a brave leader, blah, blah, blah. And, Trump, bad. And we've had our conversation on it. You saw the episode. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. But basically the fact is, like, it was not a good exchange. Like, there was definitely some things I said about how JD Vance handled it that I was not a fan of. But also the fact that Zelensky, the way he was accusing Trump and the way that he was basically demanding that America spend on this war when they have no skin in the game, it didn't sit right. And it's kind of been that thing that we're seeing right now where everybody's poo-pooing on America and they're off writing checks to Zelensky. He's doing like a world tour right now, going around all these different countries, and all these countries are like, oh, we're so much better than the Americans. Here's billions of dollars of borrowed money from China that we are going to have to pay back at a premium. So it's very interesting to see this all happen right now. And then what I also saw was basically an economist out of the United States, Harvard educated, now teaches at Columbia, basically kind of talking about the NATO agreements and talking about US's role in NATO. And why this is important is because if they keep vilifying the United States, and the United States right now is kind of on we need to spend, we need to, tighten our belts and figure out how we're going to pay for this massive amount of debt that we've incurred. And how do we do this without raising taxes on our people? They're going to look at sources where the money is going out. They already, canned US aid. So they're probably going to look at things like NATO and going, why the heck are we subsidizing the rest of the world's security? And this was kind of the conversation that they had.
My first recommendation, with all respect to Brussels, is move the NATO headquarters somewhere else. I mean it seriously, because one of the worst parts of European policy right now is a complete confusion of Europe and NATO. These are completely different, but they became exactly the same. Europe is much better than NATO. In my opinion, NATO isn't even needed anymore. I would have ended it in 1991. But because the U.S. viewed it as an instrument of hegemony, not as a defense against Russia, it continued afterwards. But the confusion of NATO and Europe is deadly, because expanding Europe meant expanding NATO, period. And these should have been completely different things. So this is the first point. My own view, again, with all respect to Michael, we only had a brief conversation about it, is that Europe basically should have its own foreign policy and its own military security, its own strategic autonomy, so-called. And it should. I'm in favor of that. I would disband NATO, and maybe Trump is going to do it anyway. Maybe Trump's going to invade Greenland. Who knows? Then you're really going to find out what NATO means. So I do think that Europe should invest in its security. 5% is outlandish, ridiculous, absurd, completely absurd. No one needs to spend anything like that amount. 2 to 3% of GDP, probably under the current circumstances. What I would do, by the way, is buy European production. Because actually, strangely, weirdly, unfortunately in this world, and it's a truism, but it's unfortunate, so I'm not championing it, a lot of technological innovation spins off from the military sector.
So what's interesting about that is he kind of like breaks down the argument of, Europe and NATO have kind of been conflated as one. And so when you see kind of this cross-European tour that Zelensky is taking, getting paychecks from all these different countries, these countries now talking about how they're going to up their spending, and it's like, haha, take that, Trump. I think that's exactly what Trump wants. He wants Europe to kind of take charge and take control and take the bill for a war that's happening within Europe. And that's not an American war that America has no interest in other than, sticking it to Russia, I guess, because, there's just not really anything for them in this. I know that there's been arguments, and we heard it from Rick Perkins too, about, safeguarding democracy and, what happens if Russia takes Ukraine, then, They basically just proven to the world that they can take whatever they want. But I don't think it's on America to be the safeguard of democracy. I think that in this case, he's totally right that really Europe, they have their own currency, they have their own binding legislation that applies to every member state. They should have their own amounts that they pay in for a European-based army that they can send to Ukraine, or that they can fund, or they can ship. And like he said, he talked about production. It's bring the production back to Europe. It's exactly what Trump's trying to do with America, bring the production back to the States. That's why he signed that deal right now with the $100 billion worth of investment into semiconductors in the States. It's because he's looking at this going, we need to take ourselves off of, the way that we are connected to China right now, with them producing everything that we need, and we need to produce it in-house. We need to be self-sufficient. And I think that if Europe was smart, they would be looking at this and saying, we need to find ways that we are not dependent on Russia for our energy, for our oil, and we need to find ways to fight back and protect ourselves and not rely on Big Brother US to do it for us.
And that's exactly what we're seeing that specifically play out before our very eyes. And in some ways, this really is, as much as it hurts, as much as there's a lot of confusion and frustration going on, this is a good thing. The idea that Trump is coming at us saying, you're going to become the 51st state. Well, kind of, if we're going to act the way we've been acting, we kind of deserve it, because we don't have a strong military right now. So if the U.S. pulls out of NATO and they pull out of any agreements with us, who's protecting us? Who's taking care of our Arctic? We don't have much of anything right now because Trudeau has siphoned it all out. So he has claimed to say we've tripled the amount we've invested in the Canadian military, but we have not seen the byproduct of that money going in. So we have to wonder what happened. It's all talking at this point. So unless we come into a specific agreement with the United States where we bring something to the table for an exchange where they do become our security again, or become our security, then we'll take that. But the problem is NATO, or members of NATO, which includes ourselves, have lacked bringing specific value to the conversation and value to the table. And that is really where the kind of the issue is we're seeing.
Yeah. And I want us to be very clear. We are in support of the people of Ukraine. They were illegally occupied. They've been suffering at the hands of Russia. Nobody's under any delusion that Putin is not a dictator. That is definitely the view. But at the same time, we can't be bankrupting countries and sending everything that we have to Ukraine to fight for them when we leave ourselves exposed. Mm-hmm. And that's what it is. If we have not been investing in the Canadian military and we do not have the economy to back up all the billions of dollars that we're sending, because we have people sleeping in tents, we have people dying from an opioid crisis, we have industry leaving our borders, we need to do some cleaning up in our own home before we throw a party here. And unfortunately, that does mean the fact that our house is burning, Ukraine is burning to the ground right now, and the other neighbors in that neighborhood need to step up and help them, because right now our house is also on fire, and we need to start, hosing down our own walls before we run to bring buckets to somebody else, because we're going to go down with them in a different way, just economically and our quality of life and our freedoms and the things that we enjoy, because unfortunately, all that requires is investment. It requires people to actually stand up and say, this is not the Canada that I want. This is not the Canada that I remember. And we need to change our government, and we need to really kind of focus on ourselves and be introspective, be truthful about where we're at and what we can do to help and where we can't help. Because like I said, right now, we don't have the money. We don't have the military resources. We are not putting our fair share into NATO. So if the US was like, you know what? Nobody else is putting in their fair share. Why should we carry the lion's share? I would understand. It would suck for Canada, definitely, to see them leave NATO, but I would understand why they would do it.
Yeah. And that's where I'm seeing the positivity in all this. And to be abundantly clear, I'm a Canadian through and through. I want us to remain Canada, but I can also acknowledge where things are going wrong and where we are being hoodwinked and gaslit by our own media and by our politicians. This is the reality that we're facing right now, and we have to acknowledge it. And I'm happy that there's attention being brought to it as we speak, because it's been an issue for a long time. We've just kind of ignored it because we've lived north of the greatest superpower in the world, and we've gotten away with it. But now there's like, all right, it's time to grow up, time to walk on your own, which is a good thing for us. It's a good thing for the members of NATO. It's a good thing for the West. These are positive things. It's painful. The way the conversations are going are hurtful. It's confusing. I get it. But at the end, the byproduct at the end of the day will be a positive thing, as much as everyone's getting attacked over it.
Yeah, it's, day one of tariffs. It just makes me think of that stupid Kelly Clarkson song. It's like, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Oh, here we go. Here we go.
But seriously though, in all seriousness, exactly what you said. When we are kind of talking about these things and saying like, what happens if these things happen? What happens if these things come to pass? Not saying that they are happening, but these are a likely future. If things keep going the way they are, I think that it's enough to kind of put the fear of God into people to actually move things in the right direction. And he even said, as unfortunate as this is, during wartime, that's when some of our greatest innovations come out. Yeah. I mean, the internet, computers, everything started as, wartime measures to kind of give you the upper edge on your enemy. So I'm looking at this going, this is not a war, but this is an economic hard time. And so what are the innovations that are going to come out of this? What are the changes that are going to happen? We were talking about Energy East Pipeline. We're talking about unlocking our critical minerals. We're talking about bringing wealth back to Canada. We're talking about trade between our own provinces that are not hindered by ridiculous laws. These are the kind of things that are positives that are going to come out of this pain. But make no mistake, there is going to be some pain coming, and we're feeling it right now. And day one of it all begins now.
Yep. So buckle up, folks. Get your hard hat on. We're in this together, as much as that phrase triggers some, but it triggers me. Don't get me wrong. I'm starting to twitch a little just hearing it coming out of my mouth, coming out of my face. But thing is, we love you. We're in this. We're going to keep fighting. We're going to keep watching. We're going to keep sharing the news as it goes on. We love you. We're out. Peace.